UK and US digital asset custodian. CustodyG provides an insured, highly secure, institutional-grade custodian service for a number of digital assets and blockchain-based information systems, which are used by organizations, consortia, and governments. In earlier years, Luke took on the role as IBM's Security Services' first global lead of blockchain security, where he worked with financial services clients with a variety of use cases, implementation, encryption, security intelligence matters, and more. Luke has also advised several asset and non-asset-backed cryptocurrency companies, where he tackles regulatory compliance, technical design, security, and business development issues. Prior to IBM, Luke was a director at PwC, a multinational professional services firm. At PwC, he co-founded the firm's blockchain and crypto finance practice for the year of 2013. Today, Luke will speak on the implications of blockchain technology and help students and faculty fully understand the opportunities present in the space. So, please join me now in welcoming Luke Sully to stage.
Thank you very much for the warm introduction. Thanks to MUBC for a great day. I've really enjoyed myself so far. I'm looking forward to this afternoon's sessions as well. I'd also like to thank the business school here and for all of you taking your well-earned time out on a Sunday to come and sit in the dark room and listen to us. What I do want to try and cover today is probably a bit of an impossible title, which is how to understand the future, which is difficult because we are talking inherently about the future. But what we do see here, what I want to impart on you today, is a couple of things. It's really trying to find the indicators that I believe may point towards the type of future that we'll see in this space, and to hopefully arm you with some ideas and philosophies to monitor those indicators as you move into your future careers. A few disclaimers, obviously. This won't cover every topic in the ecosystem. We'll have a Q&A for that afterwards, and for those in the room, I've already asked for no difficult questions, only easy questions, please. And this isn't a technical presentation at all, so we're going to focus on principles, some key business drivers, and hopefully a good glug of common sense here. So there was a question on the panel, which was how did you find yourself in this world? Well, I got into Bitcoin in 2012 when I was at PwC, and I went to my boss at the time and said, look, I really think we need to start looking at this particular technology. And he said, okay, well, let's go to a conference. When's the next Bitcoin conference? And of course, 2012, 2013, there was a conference literally every month. But the next conference was in Vegas. So my boss enthusiastically said, well, absolutely, we should definitely go and explore this topic. So we go to Vegas, and it's pretty early days in the Bitcoin world, and myself and my boss are big four accounting firms. We're in a suit. As we're standing in line waiting to go in, an elderly gentleman walks up to us in a pink tutu and a cowboy hat with two Labradors, and he walks up to us and said, you know what, it's nice to see the suits are finally here. At which point my boss turned to me and said, you're fired. And I had to scramble for a couple of years to maintain their interest in Bitcoin. 2 years after that incident, I was with a client, the National Counterterrorism Center client in DC. And they were very concerned about Bitcoin and illicit finance flows. And I said to them, if you'd seen what this industry looked like 2 years ago, there's no way you'd been interested in this thing right now. And then 2 years after that, which was 2016, I was with IBM, and IBM classified enterprise-grade blockchains as the $300 billion opportunity, which is a sizable amount of money. And as we're already seeing, has that materialized yet? I don't know. So I do want to cover a couple of topics that are kind of dear to my heart, which I believe kind of indicate or provide indicators as to where the future is going. But there is a kind of a fundamental question here that I get asked. It's the Thanksgiving kind of table question, which is, well, who uses cryptocurrencies? And this is a very complicated diagram to explain who is in the ecosystem. But the answer is primarily retail, so it's individuals, it's us. And this is reflected in the infrastructure that was built over time. It was all for, from 2010 to 2015, it was all, the infrastructure was built around us interacting. $200, $500, in and out of crypto, in and out of fiat, and exchanges and wallets were built to service that client. Now, it's important to remember one thing here. The exchanges on which you hold your cryptocurrencies all make money from transaction fees. So they make their money from us interacting very fast on kind of lower denomination amounts in and out of crypto, in and out of fiat. And that led to a variety of kind of spin-offs where trading firms started to look at the price volatility and were like, hold on, we could make a huge amount of money just trading the price arbitrage of Bitcoin. And I'll give you an example. There's a 43% price difference in the price of Bitcoin in the US and the price of Bitcoin on an exchange in South Korea. So trading firms, traders were coming out of retirement to trade the volatility and make money. Single-family offices, they wanted to move in, but the problem here, and it comes back to regulation, particularly in the US, is that certain investors can only invest in regulated securities, and of course cryptocurrencies are not. So in general terms, and here's where my PowerPoint skills should come into effect, the archetypal client at the beginning the archetypal client in the cryptocurrency space was this gentleman here. And we're going to call him Hipster Man in a Suit. And he represents a Bitcoin community that aspires to be mainstream, but behaves as rebels. Hence the suit and the beard. So that was the kind of archetypal client for several years. However, the future client for a lot of these cryptocurrency companies right now is this gentleman here. And if you don't know who he is, he's Mr. Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock. And there's a lot of groundwork being prepared right now to attract institutional investment money that Mr. Fink sits on top of, both in public but also potentially private network tokens as well. So what I want to do is just look at some of those institutions very quickly now. And I'm going to start at the top with central banks. Now, I'm going to dispel one big myth here. And the first is that central banks are kind of anti-cryptocurrencies. Well, according to the Bank of England's 2018 report into systemic risk in the financial system, which I'm sure you've all read, cryptocurrencies are bottom of the list. They do not represent a material AML threat according to the risk assessment. The number one systemic risk comes from banks themselves, which I guess is an easy answer for them to come to, because one of central banks' key responsibilities is to monitor the financial system, to protect the national economy and the citizens from a variety of different risks. And in fact, if you look at the indicators, central banks are very open to the concept of centrally backed digital currencies. And I'm going to give you two examples now. One can be found north of the border in Canada, and one can be found in my small homeland island of the UK. Canada's MIPJIP in 2014, and this system here on the right. So if you want to know how a central bank would essentially build and run a blockchain-based payment system, this is it. This is called RS Coin, and it was designed very quietly in 2017 by an acquaintance of mine at the University College London. What RS Coin introduces is essentially a degree of centralization into the two main components of blockchains, which is the generation of money supply and the constitution of a transaction ledger. So this system assumes two structural entities. One is the central bank. It's a highly centralized entity that has ultimately complete control over the generation of the money supply. And there's this distributed set of mintets, they're called here. They're kind of like nodes, if everybody knows a blockchain system as nodes. These are called mintets. So very briefly, mintets collect transactions from users, collect them into blocks, like traditional cryptocurrencies. But they differ from one element here in a crucial way. They, rather than perform a computationally difficult verification process, each mintet is simply authorized by the central bank to collect the transactions, and the authorization, the signing, is done by the central banks as the sole signatory. Now, this is one of the most public designs of a central bank digital currency that we've seen, but it's not the only one. In 2014, up there, Canada built Mintchip to replace any denomination under $20 and replace it with a digital version that can be sent between parties, pushed. There's a concept of pushing value out. And Mintchip designed a way of taking anything under $20, putting it into a wallet, and pushing it rather like cash. Ultimately, this failed, which is why you've never heard of Mintchip. Why? Because the 5 major Canadian banks were reluctant to build the infrastructure. So they got the technology right, but they didn't get the stakeholders right. They couldn't line up the same stakeholder engagement that we talked about earlier around building a business network, solving a similar problem and getting by. But the biggest reveal of all is coming next year. And all eyes will be on Japan for the Summer Olympics, to a lesser extent this year for the Rugby World Cup, if any of you are rugby fans. But Japan has built J-Coin, and it's a digital coin pegged to the yen that will be, as I understand it, the only mechanism to exchange value in Japan from 2020 in the Olympics. So these key indicators, I think, demonstrate that central banks continue to show interest in central-banked digital currencies. But why? Why do they want to do it? Well, I think you have greater control over the money supply. You can monitor transactions and get more accurate data. And theoretically, it reduces fraud in the system as well. So you're not turning up, exchanging your $100 into yen and then buying potentially some fraudulent tickets. And in fact, you save a lot of money as well. So a 2009 University of Toronto report, which led to Mintchip, indicated that Canada could save something like $16 billion just by stopping the production of coins and notes and moving to a digital system. So there you go, that's the first indicator. And if you pull back a level, RS Coin was built off of an adaptation of the blockchain to create a system that fitted the requirements for that organization. So frankly, this is how blockchains have adapted over the past few years by organizations, consortia, governments, technology firms. It's what we talked about on the panel. And I do want to explain a little bit of the philosophy around blockchains, so that which I think are important for you to take away as you understand how blockchains could be used in the future. So, I don't know if anybody's ever seen this before, but this is a basic diagram of 3 different types of computing networks: centralized, decentralized, and distributed. And here's the issue: there are 3 factors that determine the level of centralization. Architectural, so the number of physical computers in the system; political, the number of people behind that system, and behind each computer; and then logical, so if you split the network in half, could each half continue to operate? So if you look at computing networks in those 3 ways, where do blockchains sit on its axis? This is the point at which you start to really test the use case for blockchains if you apply this type of thinking. Well, they tend to be, they vary considerably. So Bitcoin is politically decentralized, it's architecturally decentralized, but it's logically centralized. And the inherent paradox that we've seen and continue to bump up against is that the constituent parts of a blockchain, right, so consensus, how we verify things, the replicated ledger, the distributed ledger, cryptography, some business logic, they're all best suited for highly decentralized distributed systems to create trustless environments. However, the degree to which corporations and organizations can really buy into a trustless execution environment is questionable. So that's why they pull on these three levers to build systems that fit within the parameters of how they're allowed to operate. Basically, I just said the same thing that we talked about earlier. So we will continue to see these sort of hybrid systems with highly politically centralized systems, with trusted third parties, and I would say varying degrees of architectural and logical decentralization. So I'm not going to go too deep down this rabbit hole because I know we just all had lunch. But 4 things to consider in blockchain: immutability. Once information is agreed, it's tamper-proof. Provenance. Participants know where the asset ultimately originated from. Provenance. How do we solve the Facebook fake news problem? Well, we need provenance first. Finality. So the information is held in one place, albeit replicated and shared. And consensus. This is the mechanism, the agreement mechanism to determine whether the transaction is valid. We're seeing some repetitive themes during the day, but consensus is a really important topic, and it is actually, personally, a favourite area of mine. I want to go one level down real quick to give you a flavour of that. So, the basic technology principle around consensus, right, the method by which these computers verify that something is true, is this. The more consensus you need, the more costly your network is to run. Right? So if you look at the Bitcoin network, that's why it consumes, the aggregated computing power is about 175 megawatts, or a fifth of a nuclear power plant, or more electricity than the island of Ireland uses. Okay, so if it's permissionless, it uses something like proof of work, lots of computers have to participate, more electricity, more costly. Okay, and then you have somewhat decentralized, this proof of stake, where there's no reward for validating transactions. The validating computer is chosen and unknown, so it's a known computer in the network. And it's sort of a first past the post in terms of validating the transactions. IBM used something called PBFT, which is up in the top there. And it's a consensus by majority, so you need like 2/3 of the computers to agree for something to be valid. And then you have these kind of like spin-off ones, this XFT, which has been floating around. But it's all about pulling 2 levers, which is how fast do you need the transactions to go through? And how big do you need to scale your network? If you go back to the central bank can easily deploy and run a blockchain network because they're the only ones signing the transaction. Sorry. So actually building a blockchain-based payment system with one computer verifying transactions is super easy. Technology is not the barricade there. Okay. Complexity. Is complexity a good thing? Do blockchains really solve problems? Do they? Because I'm not sure they still do. Here's a real life example where the classroom and the boardroom clashed. So in 2016, I mapped the entire supply chain of a piece of gold from mine to refinery to vault. It was tedious. And it was also super complicated. Not just from the perspective of the number of parties that were involved, but from a couple of other perspectives. So the regulatory oversight that some of these organizations had to contend with to ensure compliance with issues like slave labor and purity of gold levels the insurance costs between the parties, who holds title of gold at which stage, how collateral is extended by who and for what reasons. It was really complicated, and it got me thinking, with so much vested interest in this complexity, which parties are you going to disintermediate by using a blockchain? And that really becomes the central issue, and this is a big takeaway that I want to leave you with, is that there's a reason why complex processes cost money. Because of vested interests like banks, who make money by extending credit to organizations, who have to support the cost of compliance to report on a regular basis to ensure safety and quality. Now, you can debate whether they're any good at those things and whether that's effective, but the reality is this: if you try and disintermediate those parties and their contributions, how are you going to manage those issues, and how are you going to create cost savings and efficiencies? And at what cost? So isn't some level of complexity necessary? If you're trying to replace the system, if you aren't trying to replace the system, why build a blockchain? These are all fundamental questions. And you need to balance those considerations when you're thinking about a use case or a blockchain system against areas of things like process automation, streamlining, cost efficiencies, and things like documentation, cash processes. Those are all valid. But just building a blockchain for blockchain's sake, I think we all need to move on from that. How are we doing so far? That was the most techie part of what I was going to say. So we've explained blockchains in sort of repetitions. You keep hearing the same themes. We've explained blockchains on things like floating opposites. And I'm now going to describe it in a way that is not like the other. As I've said before, blockchains are incentive machines. You contribute, you are rewarded with tokens. Don't forget that. There's powerful, powerful use cases in building systems that rely on that. Okay, tokenization is really important. Non-cryptocurrencies. So this really is the bright future, we believe. And those are non-public or private network tokens. And so if you look at the market cap for the public network tokens, let's call them cryptocurrencies, it's about $200 billion right now. 90% of that market cap sits in 20 coins alone. But imagine tokenizing additional financial instruments that we believe capture sort of 18 plus trillion. Why is tokenization important? Because it provides liquidity. We talked about this earlier. Tokenization should equal liquidity. So what can we tokenize? Real estate, fixed income, art, land, IP rights, all of that can be tokenized, and fractional ownership over those securities can take place. Secondary markets can be created, right? That creates more liquid environments. So right now, you and I can't get access to certain securities because we can't buy them in bulk. The brokers will allow. Tokenizing these things can create more liquid environments. When you're thinking about a business idea where you want to tokenize securities or assets, let's call them that, think about the liquidity. Where's that? How will you create more liquidity by doing that? So that's a really important takeaway, I think. Payments and identity. I don't want to touch on this because for too long. It's a seminar really in of itself. And I do want to talk about it because it's the original use case for cryptocurrencies. It's important to understand some of the indicators in there that will point to the future. 20,000 transactions a second is the holy grail here. Visa and MasterCard hit 20,000 transactions a second. So these blockchain-based payment systems are trying desperately to create technological ways to hit that number. So who gets there first? identity is not an area that I've looked into too much. How do you scale identity in these new mechanisms? Self-sovereign identity is a fascinating topic. How do you scale it? How do you get around data privacy issues on blockchain? All these are questions. These are questions you should be asking when you're starting to think about whether you've got a really good business idea, whether you're going to go and work for a company in this space. These are the types of questions you've got to start asking. And then finally, and we're on the home stretch here, retail infrastructure versus market infrastructure. Right at the beginning I talked about all the infrastructure was built around you and me exchanging $200, $500 worth of crypto. But the market infrastructure for exchanges and institutional investors, that's all coming in now. And part of the reason is there are some significant security challenges in the infrastructure that's going on right now. So if you look at all the hacks that make the news, apart from the gentleman that unfortunately died, who didn't have his password to unlock his laptop to 190 million worth of crypto, a lot of the hacks have taken place at exchanges, and a lot of exchanges keep hot wallets. Okay, they favour accessibility over your security. I'll say that again. Exchanges favour accessibility over your security because they make money on transaction fees. They want you to have a very fast, easy way of moving value around. They don't want it to take too long because they make money while you transacting. But the trade-off is lower security, and that's why hacks are taking place there. There's also a game that we like to play in this space called regulatory arbitrage, which is where companies of varying degrees of integrity or ethical quality tend to jump around to the jurisdictions where there's less barriers to entry, less questions being asked. Okay, so we talked about countries, we talked about the US. In the US, the challenges here, the deep regulatory infrastructure, both at federal and state level. You have smaller jurisdictions like Malta, Mauritius, Jersey, countries where ordinarily you would ignore, but they're trying to make leaps and bounds because they're smaller and they're offering, let's just say, more flexible terms for you as an organisation to work in. So there's a lot of security challenges still in space. And this is an interesting diagram. I won't go into too many details, but just from a KYC perspective, a lot of these exchanges have varying degrees of quality and processes just to onboard clients. And the New York Attorney General's office asked the top 10 crypto exchanges to produce a list of the data that they asked for from clients to get onboarded. And these are, the top 10 in the US. And the takeaway here is there's no uniformity at all. So not all the standards are still pretty irregular. And these are the well-capitalized ones with big compliance organizations. So custody, which is what we're involved with, custody is a piece of institutional infrastructure. We believe that regulation will change to reclassify some of these tokens as securities, which will allow institutional investors to move into the space. And once they do, they'll require an insured third-party custodian, either directly or through the hedge funds that they invest in, institutional infrastructure. Custody works pretty simply, actually, which is where you send us your funds, we take the private key, and we move it into a highly secure facility. Now, a Ferrari's a car, and my first car out of college was a Peugeot. They're both cars, right? Well, I wouldn't call a Peugeot and a Ferrari, although they're both cars, they're not the same. Custody isn't the same. Not all custody is the same, that's for sure. And so, we've been working very hard to make sure that we build the best-in-class capability. And getting insurance is really important as well. So with that, cold storage, hot wallets, I don't know if you've heard some of these terms, vaultless key storage, they're all floating around there. but getting a insured regulated capability requires a certain amount of kind of mainstream technology and mainstream processes. And it shows one thing, is that the insurers and the regulators, as fast as they can to try and catch up, still aren't 100% at pace with innovation. And so here's the other takeaway. When you try and build something, when you have a good idea, that's good. But you need to go back and educate the stakeholders that can enable your business. You need to have relationships with the regulators, with local government. You need to have relationships with insurers. You can't go it alone. So you've got to educate, which comes back to one of the central points of why we're here today. Is education so important? A room like this, you guys taking the time out on a Sunday to listen, to talk, you'll maybe take away 3, 4, 5 things. But it's the commitment to education on this which puts you further ahead of your competitors, which puts you in a better position to understand and explain the world. And that's really, really what the whole point of today is. The future of custody, well, I don't know. I've got to be honest with you, I don't really know what the future of custody is. I'll tell you what it's not. It's not exchanges bolting on additional services like cold storage. And it's not small, pokey jurisdictions in the middle of nowhere that decide to onboard companies with a really, really one-page tick box list. There has to be rigor in what we do now. There's so much money at stake and so much expectation. There has to be rigor about what you do. And that's my other takeaway for you guys today. You're going to have rigor in your process. When you've got an idea, sit around the table and crunch it out. Have rigor. Because I've sat with people that do not have rigor, and ultimately it comes back to all of them. So to conclude, here's the kind of takeaways that I wanted to leave you guys with. Understand central banks. Central bank digital currencies. It's coming. It's coming next year. And you heard it here first. Japan, look east. It's going to be super interesting. Find the institutional infrastructure. Where is it? What needs to be built? Who's building it? Evaluate networks in 3 ways: architectural, political, logical. Complexity isn't actually a bad thing. Inefficiencies are. Tokenization should equal liquidity in markets. So where's your liquidity in your tokenization project? If you're disintermediating stuff, does it really mean you're making it more efficient? And it's really about the security at one level. Okay, congratulations on getting through. That's all I had to say. I'd be happy to take questions. Thank you very much for listening. Question? Oh, yes, sir.
I really like your point about education, of course, and engaging the regulatory community. What are some ways to do that?
There's the ways that I know that some regulatory organisations use are, there's something called a sandbox concept. So that's where regulators create a dialogue with startups and they bring them in for a period of time, understand what the organisation does and learns from. Regulators actually do want to learn. So if you're building, if you have a startup, if there's something you want to do and you know you've got to interact with regulators, try and find where you need to be regulated and see if they've got a sandbox. We have a situation right now in Ireland, right? So Ireland is just about to get a sandbox set up, but right now they don't. So we are actually physically going and sitting down with the regulators and introducing ourselves and walking them through. Same with the central bank. On financial technology innovation, which let's just say this kind of fits under, people are really, really receptive. Regulators, central banks, governments, they are receptive. The challenge is finding the right person to do that. I like to think we have good attorneys that can help us get through that. Some of them even attend events. But yeah, I think be proactive and go and speak to them and explain what you're doing. Questions? Yes, sir.
What do you think will be like the first mass tokenized assets? Is it going to be something like real estate, or will it be something like the stock market, which is really foreseeable, tokenizing it just for the sake of liquidity and practice ownership? So what do you think is going to be the really first mass tokenized assets, essentially?
That's a great
What areas?
question. Patrick, were you here when I said no difficult questions? So Switzerland, I think, are about to launch something which I think is really interesting. That's only just starting to get made public. I know I like IP, so I would love to see a day when IBM tokenizes its patents. I don't know when that's coming. I think real estate is probably the low-hanging fruit here, and I know a bunch of projects that are working on that. So fractional ownership, right, through tokens of real estate. But again, if you come back to some of the basic principles, basic philosophies, and you start to search to find those tokenization projects using those philosophies, you may pick one that you may not have realised that's out there. But yeah, I would say because regulation is probably more favourable out in Asia and Europe rather than the US right now, I think you'll see that first wave east of here somewhere. And then the US a little bit later. Sorry to say that. The US is behind. Okay, great. Well, thanks. Yes, sir. Sorry.
So you said like you're using wallets for custody. So are you using hot wallet or cold wallet? But if you're using cold wallet, like as we all know, like the guy just died with like the passwords. So if something similar happens in the future, like what do you think? Like how are you gonna control that?
Yeah, so we generate our own public-private key pair,
Okay.
and you as an institutional client essentially send us your funds to our public key address. So I guess in that technical way, that's a hot wallet.
Mm-hmm.
But we take that private key and we move it through what's called an air-gap system into an offline facility, and we break it down per coin, per client, with a limit of $5 million for each one. We burn that private key onto a physical smart card, and we sit it in a critical infrastructure data center. So there's absolutely no single point of contact, and there's multiple systems there. So heaven forbid that I have a massive heart attack. The company keeps going.
Sure.
All right. Thanks again. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
All right, perfect. So thank you again to Luke Stelly for giving us that address on some of the more better ways to conceptualize the space in terms of asset tokenization. I think is really one of the most interesting aspects of the space that if you do a little bit of research on it, it really does blow your mind about the ability, the things that he said, such as liquidity and the ability to have fractional ownership of not just, say, securities, but of stuff like real estate, and be able to have fractional ownership to the income that's coming into those real estate areas. And then it's really a fascinating subject. So thank you again, Luke. What we're going to do now is we're going to take another 10-minute break. We're going to allow you guys to go stretch your legs again, grab another cup of coffee or something like that. We are doing the raffle as well, and we'll unveil the winners of all of those after these next couple of speakers. And then we'll return with Charlie Lockheed, who is the Unify Project. So yeah, thank you very much for your time and for your attention, and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes, which puts us around, let's call it 2:40, so about 15-minute break. Awesome, thank you very much.